Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle, Desrochers, and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday night segment of The Outer Realm. We are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been a part of our journey since the very beginning. So huge thank you to Folgers, Amelia, and I could not do it without you. Also big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for his contribution of his time, his music, and his voice for the intro that you just heard. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on any of your favorite music platforms. Also, thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all of our banners and logos here at the show. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Also specializes in the Halloween genre, but can do phenomenal commission pieces, books, comic strips, you name it. This guy can do it. So also, it is that time where we want to bring you guys up to speed. That's right. The Paranormal Symposium, Halifax Paranormal Symposium, which is coming up on October the 7th. So pretty soon, actually, about a week and a half. Amelia and I in the Outer Realm do sponsor this event. It's going to be fantastic. And let me see if I could just bring up some of the guests that are going to be there for you guys. Hold on. Stop the presses. I'm trying. I am kind of solo at the moment. Here we go. Great guests. So we have Kim Moser. For those who are all just listening, since we are a family, I tend to forget that sometimes. Kim Moser, Lauren Coleman, Richard Gallagher, Daryl Wash, Chris Stiles. Kim, Daryl, and Chris have been on the show before, and I know that the director, Dr. Elliot Van Dusen, and Dr. Daryl Walsh are going to be on tomorrow night. So we're going to have a whole lot of paranormal discussions, and we're really going to touch a lot on the symposium as well, just to give you guys a heads up. They've got a lot of things going on, and contests, so on and so forth. So heads up for that. So tonight we're doing something a little bit different. I've been super excited about this. Dang, thunderstorm ruined it for us last time. So anyway, they are with us this evening. And we are really proud to welcome Daniel and Teresa Duke, authors and historians and the great-great-grandchildren of Jesse James. They're going to be discussing their book, The Mysterious Life and Faked, you heard right, Death of Jesse James. If time allows, we'll touch on one of their other books called Secret History of the Wild Wild West. Super exciting, which will segue into another segment that they will be joining us on. And who better to consult with and research and write the story about Jesse James, but his great-great-grandchildren, who put a lot of time and research into this. I mean, a lot. So it's going to be really fantastic. So for anybody who's listening on audio, which I know is going to be like millions of people, so we thank you and be patient. For those who are in the chat rooms, remember, people, we've got 7 chat rooms. It's like having a super highway that comes down to like 1 lane. So it's going to be, a little bit we have a pretty good handle on it, but we can't answer everything all at once, and we have to keep up with the topic. So I see people are chiming in. So hello, Wayne, Tamara, Brian. Hey, Ryan, and Dolly. I know you're in there somewhere. So nice that you guys are ahead of the game, and we're looking forward to hearing your comments and getting your questions. So in the meantime, we're going to bring Teresa on, and we're going to be waiting for Daniel, who's fashionably, actually, he's actually not late. We got a minute to go. Kudos to him. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having us on.
Oh, pleasure. I've really been looking forward to this because, like, seriously, who hasn't heard of Jesse James?
You'd
You
be
know?
surprised. There's actually some people out there who are like, who? I'm like, never mind. Too long of a
Yeah.
story to
I'm
get
like,
into.
what? Like, for real?
Yeah.
You know? Wow. Well, I
Or
mean,
they think of they think of the modern day one, the bike rider.
that
They're like, oh, him? I'm like, no.
yeah, we love him. Yeah, what?
Yeah.
He's dead? What?
Yeah.
I know, I know. No, you're not wrong with that. You're not wrong with that. I think, people Googling information don't know how to use actual keywords like West, Wild
Yes.
West,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So we're just going to wait on Daniel, and then we're going to get started. I am, like I said, really looking forward to it, and I'm
We
glad.
are too.
Well, that's great. You'll find that
Yes.
you guys are going to pretty much, take this wherever you want to go. It's going to be very, very laid back. Amelia can't be joining us tonight. She's been off for a little bit with family stuff, and I know she's just sitting there going, but you are coming back on, so she's like, okay, that's all right then. you know so she does send her best, and I know she'll be listening in as she always does.
Well,
Oh,
we appreciate you rescheduling for us. I was so
oh,
upset about that thunderstorm. We need the rain, but I
yes.
couldn't think of the worst time. And then the internet went out, and I was like,
It's like, come
so
on.
yeah. I
It
was like,
actually
really?
worked out. Like, we tend to book months ahead, and but we always try, and this is really like a popular demand thing. We always try just to do a show, the two of us, like once a month. And when I looked at the timing, I went, oh, I could switch this. This is okay.
I was,
So it worked
thank
out
you.
really well. Yeah. Oh, I was really like ecstatic. I'm like, wait, I have a
Yeah.
solution. I can't always say that.
Yeah.
It's
Well, we were
always
really
like,
grateful. Thank you.
oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I see Dan is here. I don't see a camera. Dan, did you give your, well, let's bring him on. Nope, not connected. I don't know if you can hear me, but you have to give permission to your microphone and camera. So I will bump him out. Let him try again. There we go. Perfect. All right. So we'll wait. Give it another whirl. StreamYard is actually pretty easy. I think depending on the platform, it doesn't like Safari very much, apparently. So, Google Chrome apparently is its favorite. So I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, we can, slowly get started as we wait for him to come on. So tell us about, I'll get to, the sort of humble beginnings with the two of you with everything, but tell us about your background.
Well, um, I've been doing the research with my family for like over 20 years. We started with my mom.
Right.
There's not a whole lot to tell. I work a day job.
Right.
I do tech support, and I do have a handwriting analysis certificate where I can help authenticate signatures. Um,
Right.
just kind of not a whole lot to tell other than the research we've done with Jesse James, and
Right.
that's always my main focus. Even with my
Right.
day job, I think it gets me in trouble sometimes because my mind is not really where it needs to be, and it's always on the other stuff,
Right.
on
Right. Right.
the main thing that we have spent our life researching. So
Yeah, it's pretty exciting though when you think about it. I mean, when I started looking at my family lineage, it was just once you start hitting on things,
oh
it
yeah,
just snowballs, right? And then
yeah,
you have to keep going. You can't just
no,
stop. midway and, oh, wait, sorry. Yes, I do have
Oh,
to
yeah.
work today.
Yeah. Yeah, and you really do, because it's like there's so much that you can find in your background, and it'll take you down, one rabbit hole and another, and before
Yes.
you know it, you're just kind of immersed in it.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just and it is hard when you are looking at on your day job and you're like, oh, there's all my stats I have to think about today. I don't want to think about that.
I want to be retired.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
things to do.
yeah. I
I
got
know.
research to do.
I know. It is really hard. There he is. All right. Bam. Hello, sir. How are you?
Pretty good, and you?
Well, I'm much better now. Gang's all here.
Well, I tried my microphone on my PC and it wouldn't work, so I got on my phone.
Oh, that's okay. That's
All
okay.
right,
It sounds beautiful. So,
good.
yeah, so we are all good to go.
All
Um,
right.
so Teresa was just telling us about, her background in all of this. Do you want to chime in with yourself as well? Or you're just like author extraordinaire?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, our late mother, Betty Dorset Duke, had started all of the research. She got the ball rolling on all of this. Um, my sister and I had just got, well, we were in college long ago, and mom had some free time on her hands, so she grew up hearing the legends of Jesse James and her family at family get-togethers, holidays, things like that, and she wanted to find out once and for all whether our family stories were true, that Jesse James faked his death and died, or didn't die as history stated.
Right.
So, or was our family history true, or was the accepted history true? That claims that Jesse James was killed by Bob and Charlie Ford, shot in the back of the head, and
Right.
in 1882. So she wanted to find out what the truth was, and we had family photos, a treasure map that was passed down through the family, and a lot of different items. And she, instead of going to just anybody, she took it to the biggest experts she could find, which was the Texas Department of Public Safety, our state police.
Wow.
Their forensic lab verified that our photos matched the historically accepted photos. And then she took it to the Austin Police Department, their forensic lab. They verified the same thing. And she took it to a third group called Visionics at the time. Then they were purchased by a company called Identics, but they were world leaders in facial recognition technology and sold their software to the military and international airports, stuff like that. And that's
Wow.
what got the ball rolling. And we thought we thought the James Farm and Museum in Missouri would be happy to know that Jesse wasn't killed and that he got away, but that was the last thing they wanted to hear.
Yeah, academia and having to change history,
Yeah,
not really on their top list of
yeah,
priorities. And
yeah,
it sounds like your mom was messing around. Like she's just,
yeah,
let's just go to the top, get this done and over with. Because there's a lot of like you guys went through DNA stuff. There's all this DNA
yeah,
stuff that you can look up on that and is saying, no, this is conclusive. And
yeah.
so how do you work? How do you, first of all, separate the legend from fact?
Well, Jesse's life up until it was both the accepted history and our family stories agree pretty much on Jesse's life up until, well, after the Civil War. Through the Civil War, he was born and raised in Kearney, Missouri. He fought in the Civil War. He was 14 years old. And
Wow.
I don't know if you want me to go into details on
No,
why.
please. That's your show. You take it where
Okay,
you want
well,
it to go.
thanks. He was 14 years old. He wanted to fight in the war. And little backtracking on that. A lot of, in history books, a lot of the people, most of the time you see the Civil War started in 1860 and, lasted 4 years, and that was that. Well, in Missouri, in Western Missouri and what's now Kansas, the fighting had been going on for about 10 years before that, almost 10 years before the official beginning of the Civil War. So,
Right.
you'd have guerrillas and just it was like mob justice. You'd have guerrillas form like the Red Lakes in Kansas. They would raid homes in Missouri, and at first they were saying they were doing it to free slaves, but they were killing people, stealing everything they could get. One of the preachers on the Kansas side would kill preachers in Missouri and take their whatever he wanted for his church, stuff like that.
Wow.
It got real bad. So Jesse's farming. He's 14 years old, um, and they live in western Missouri. Well, and a group of Union-backed guerrillas, the Red Lakes from Kansas, rode onto his farm. They strapped him to a plow and beat him real bad, and whipped him with their sabers, is what the flat end of their sabers. And then they tied his mom to a tree and whipped her. And some accounts say she was pregnant at the time. And then they hung his stepfather, Dr. Reuben Samuel. They didn't kill him, but he had permanent brain damage after that. And so, I could understand why Jesse would want revenge, especially when you're a 14-year-old kid.
Oh God, yeah.
All
that anger and testosterone.
Yeah. It wasn't so much politics. It was it was basically defending your property, your life, and your family.
Right.
And a perfect example of that, like Jesse, he fought for the Confederacy. Cole Younger and the Younger brothers also fought for the Confederacy, but the Younger family were Union backers. They supported the Union until Union-backed guerrillas murdered and robbed their father on his way from town. So that's why Cole Younger and his brothers joined in with the James Gang. Well, with the guerrillas, and then after the Civil War, the James Gang. It got real. It was, people like, and I like it. It's easier. You don't have to think as much sometimes, but you want everything cut and dry, black and white. And gray, there's a lot of gray areas though, and much of history is just full of gray areas. I don't take it. I don't try to condemn anybody for anything they did in the past. There was most people, Hitler, I condemn, but I could ramble on about that. But anyway,
it's a whole other show, man. I can't air us on YouTube though.
Yeah, well, there was one quote I liked was it was from Louis L'Amour, and I can't quote it verbatim, but he said people should know not to judge. You don't judge people, or you can't judge people based on the canvas of their time. They can only be judged from people in their time, not in any other time. So I always liked that. So I always try to remember that when I'll read something, because we've had ancestors who were Northerners, ancestors who were Confederates. That was their fight. It's not mine. So I try not to judge them.
War is a whole other cup of tea though. The rules it's an entirely different world.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Whole new ball game.
Yeah.
They play by their own rules. Completely different.
And you can't judge because, you're not in their shoes. It's about survival.
Right.
It's about, in some cases, revenge.
Yes.
It's about, like you said, Dan, just protecting what's yours because, it's a free for all in times like that. And people do kill mercilessly for no reason.
In a way, when I look at
a lot of them were farmers, and they were farmers, and then they just turned into guerrillas fighting to protect their territory, and they were just kind of thrust into it.
Right.
Well, and it reminds me of the way Jesse fought. I mean, he was one of the younger of the guerrillas. He was only 14 when he started, but he had a couple other friends around the same age. And in our current time, they would have been considered child soldiers. And it shocks me.
Unheard of in our time.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, the world they do this, in certain parts of the country. The world goes crazy over stuff like that. What was acceptable back then? I mean, they wouldn't take too kindly to that nowadays, Exactly. So he basically went in and at 14 years old, went in to protect the family honor and the family property and do his part.
Yeah, and his brother Frank.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And they obviously survived the Civil War
That's true.
fairly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Obviously.
yeah, they
Yeah.
both did. Yeah.
Jesse
Wow.
got shot. I think he was shot twice in the right lung, two different times during the Civil War. And
One time he was actually trying to surrender.
yeah, the first time he was trying to surrender at the end of the war, and he rode up, riding up to a Union picket, and they opened fire on him and shot him through the lung. They wanted to finish him off, and he escaped, and somehow he survived. But he literally he had to take care of his lung, dress it, or the wound
Yeah.
for several years before it finally started to get better.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he did try to do the right thing, and surrender, but when he tried to do it, they tried to stop it, and so
Yep.
they were kind of forced into that lifestyle.
Yes. I guess if that's what you know. I mean, if you have to get clipped somewhere, the lung is the one, organ in the body that can, no, or the liver. Is it
Oh
the
yeah,
liver? The liver, one of them can regenerate and heal itself. So
I think
I
it's
believe
the
that's the
liver.
river.
the liver.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it is the liver.
Right. So the war is over and they go on. They've got a gang and they are doing this whole alleged Robin Hood thing,
Yeah.
which is
Uh,
what I love about this story.
they they that without getting into another topic, well, they were branded outlaws. All the guerrillas who rode with Quantrell's guerrillas, that was a member of, or that's who Jesse rode with. It was
Right.
a large guerrilla outfit, and anybody who rode with Quantrell's guerrillas was denied amnesty at the end of the war.
Right.
And they were no worse than the Redlegs that they'd been fighting, for so long. But the Redlegs were on the winning side, so they were heroes, and the Quantrell's guerrillas were considered outlaws. And
Right.
they if they tried to turn themselves in like Jesse tried, you were killed on sight or given a quick trial and hung. So
Wow.
they kind it, and there's no document proving it other than hearsay and from family and different books. Other authors had said this.
Mhm.
Basically, he was he was an outlaw. They were branded outlaws, so they lived up to that name.
Right.
And
Right.
they most of the tactics. Well, the tactics they were used to fighting a war. It was guerrilla tactics, and it worked great for robbing banks and trains and stagecoaches too. So
Right. Right. So basically, big shoes to fill. Big
yeah,
legend. I
and
mean,
as for the Robin Hood side of it, John Newman Edward was a well-known journalist back in the day, and he had a soft spot for the James Gang, the James Younger Gang, and he wrote wonderful tales. He was basically their PR man the
Yeah.
wow.
entire time for years. Um, anything that was blamed on them, he would write a big article in support of the James Gang. And he
Right.
was basically their cheerleader in the newspaper world. So
Right. Right. That's which is fantastic. You got a whole fan club back there. This
yeah,
is great. I'm sure there were a lot of people who were just rooting them on,
yeah.
especially on the heels of a war.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
You want a
half
hero.
the
You want a
country,
hero.
and
Yeah.
that's interesting. You said that. Um, Jesse and Frank. Well, half the country at the time thought of them as heroes. The other half thought
Yeah.
of them as brutal murderers.
Mm.
But after everything was said and done, like years later, Frank was brought to trial and he was acquitted of any crimes he was ever committed or accused of. He was
Wow.
acquitted,
Yeah.
but the funny thing was he became a shoe salesman and did different just odd jobs around the country. But some of his best friends were former Yankee judges. They were judges who fought for the North. And I
Wow.
thought that was it. A lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, it's the South versus the North.
Hmm.
And, that war never ended for any of them. It actually did end. And a lot
Yeah.
of their good friends were Northern judges and politicians.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic.
And
So Frank gets to get into a normal life pretty much for the
Yes.
most part. I mean, if Frank James can actually, if you can
Have
actually
a
call
normal
it
life.
as normal
Yeah.
as possible for who he is, and Jesse just keeps living the outlaw life.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
and he wanted out.
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry,
That's
Teresa.
okay. No, that's
Uh,
okay.
Jesse had wanted
Yeah.
out, and he had tried to. A lot of people don't realize he tried to fake his death in 1879,
Oh,
um, and it didn't work. One of his fellow gang members, George Shepard, claimed to have shot Jesse in the back of the head while they were all riding through Indian territory, which is modern day Oklahoma.
Right.
And George said he shot Jesse in the back of the head and got to town as quick as he could, and got shot in the leg. He got a little scrape in his leg, and claimed that was one of the other gang members who tried to kill him because he killed Jesse. Well, a posse went out looking for the body. They never had a body. They never found anything. And then a few weeks later, Jesse was spotted in another town, and it hit the newspapers, and that chance was shot.
Right.
He couldn't say so. They kind of set a precedence there. He was wanting out. He didn't want to keep up that life. He already had a family here in Texas before that, and then in 1882, his brother, or his first cousin Wood Height, was in a gunfight with Bob and Charlie Ford. Wood was sleeping with Bob and Charlie Ford's sister Martha, and Martha had a farm. Martha was also sleeping with her farmhand Jim Gibson. So it was a
Jesus.
little weird love triangle. A
Yeah.
fight broke out, and Woodhite, Jesse's cousin, shot the farmhand and killed him. And Bob and Charlie shot Wood, and that was the end of Woodhite. So they passed that body off. That's the body that was passed off as Jesse in 1882, when the world believed Jesse was shot in the back of the head.
Right. So there's the body they were looking for.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, people would deny it. Some of our opposition would deny that was the case. Of course, they have no proof, and there's photos. We have a photo of Woodhite alive and a photo of him in the casket. It looks just like the same guy, and we've got a lot of proof that with tons of proof that Jesse wasn't killed, as history said. But the one thing about Wood is Woodhite came from a wealthy family in Kentucky, and they loved their son. They would have wanted to bury him. Back then they would have wanted to give him a good Christian burial, the way it was worded. And
Yes.
there's no grave for Wood, no known grave at all, and it's because he was buried in Jesse's spot.
Wow.
Passed off as yeah. And
tough.
I don't mean to get ahead of myself. I get excited about this and I start rambling.
It's your show, guys. Take a rewind. I'll keep up, I promise.
But our late mother, Betty Dorset Duke, she spearheaded the investigation of the exhumation that was done in 1995. Professor James Stars from Georgetown University got together with the James Farm and Museum in Missouri, and they decided to exhume the grave and prove once and for all with DNA that Jesse died as history said. And our mom, and no pun intended, but she shot their story full of holes. They used the grave they exhumed had multiple bodies in it. It had male and female bones in the same grave. The coffin, that was in the Tupperware on the farm. I'll get to that in a second. So the grave they exhumed had male and female bones in the grave. They couldn't get anything that revealed any DNA. So to test it against a family in Oklahoma who claimed to be related to Jesse, but were later proven not to. But I'm trying to not get ahead of myself on this. So they dig up the grave. It's got multiple bodies in it, and female and male. And the coffin that he was alleged that Jesse was said to have been buried in didn't match the coffin at all. The one they dug up didn't match it at all. So they couldn't get any DNA out of any of the bones to test. So there was the original grave that Jesse was buried in was on the family farm just a few miles away from the cemetery they did the exhumation at. In 1978, the curator of the museum dug up part of the yard, and he found a dog tooth, a hog tooth, some human teeth, and some other bones. And he put it all in a Tupperware bowl and kept it. And he would pass out little pieces of bone as souvenirs to people. But
Jesus.
that yeah, exactly.
That's
Well, they
like a
claimed,
sideshow thing.
yeah, and of course they claimed that was Jesse's bones in that Tupperware bowl. And first of all, that's the furthest thing you could get from a scientific, from an
Right.
exhumation. But
Right.
so they had the bones in the Tupperware bowl, and Professor Stars, who he wasn't a professor of forensics. He had not, forensics was a hobby. He was a law professor. He claimed that was the only choice they had, was to test that tooth against the family in Oklahoma. And they tested the tooth and claimed that it matched. And he proclaimed to the world that was the tooth that told the tale. Found out later that all the background of that tooth, there's no chain of custody. It could have been anybody's tooth. It could have been somebody from the James family. It could have been anybody. Doesn't prove it was Jesse's. And the people who they tested it against in Oklahoma had a questionable lineage. They can't prove who exactly they're descended from. But for James Stars and the Missouri, James Farm in Missouri, were just trying to wrap it up real quick and make the world believe that was Jesse. And it ended up, they have no proof at all. They ended up actually shooting themselves in the foot and making themselves look worse. The attorney, the former Clay County commissioner, who was in charge of holding the teeth and a sample of hair that was said to have been Jesse's, by court order, he was ordered to turn the tooth and the hair over. The hair he submitted, he told my mother and me to our faces. He pulled that hair out of his friend's head and submitted that. And the funny thing is, they built one documentary they did around that entire hair, and it had nothing to do with Jesse. It was pulled out of out of the head of a man named John Hartman, who was the Clay County Parks director at the time. And all he would say about the tooth, he said, "I guarantee you the tooth had the same origins," and that's all he would say about it.
Right.
So
hog?
yeah. Well, when we came out with our late mother came out with all this, people
Danny,
connected to the James Farm. Go ahead.
Also, tell them, Danny had a discovery during that time when they were doing the exhumation as well. When they came out with the results, they said they compared the supposed hair with the relatives of Jesse James, but Danny found some evidence showing that there was a question within their line of ancestry.
Yeah, I mentioned that a minute ago, where they they have no proof as to where they came from, who they're descended from.
There was a lot of questions.
Yeah, there was a lot. It was wild, but they I can't remember where I started off, where I was leaving off at. Something about the DNA, the tooth. The other thing,
the hair.
Professor Stars, being a law professor at Georgetown University, claimed that Missouri State had a law, because people asked, well, why don't you just exhume Jesse's mother and test the people in Oklahoma against her DNA? That's she would have the mitochondrial DNA they were looking for, because that's only passed down through a female line. And people started asking him that, and he claimed falsely that the state of Missouri had a law that said you couldn't exhume a body unless it died under mysterious circumstances or a murder, something like that. There's no such law. We went down to the University of Texas, and we're talking to attorneys there, or law professors, and one attorney, and they helped us look for any law, and there's no such law. He just made stuff up to fit his story.
And also at Mount Olivet Cemetery, the whole thing was just a big joke.
It was crazy.
they were known to move the headstones, and they did
Yeah.
that because they feared the people would come in and try to steal Jesse's bones. So they would move
Right.
the headstones. So they don't even know for sure if they were in the right
Right.
grave.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
just so much to it with that exhumation.
So let me back up one quick minute. How
Okay.
exactly does history say Jesse was supposed to have died, and where was he supposed to be buried? Like this, obviously, it's the cemetery you're
Okay.
talking about now.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, they said that Bob and Charlie in 1882 in St. Joseph, Missouri,
Right.
that Jesse was living in a house there with his alleged wife and 2 children,
Okay.
and they claim that Bob and Charlie had joined the gang recently, but they were working for the governor who put a price on Jesse's head. The governor, by the way, was a relative of Jesse's, but that's another story.
Another
They,
rabbit hole.
Full circle.
Another rabbit
yeah,
hole.
I love
so
it.
Bob and Charlie, while the way the story goes is Jesse saw he was talking with Bob and Charlie in the house, and he saw a picture on the wall. They called it a sampler. You know those little crocheted things that say "Home Sweet Home," stuff like that.
Right.
He saw that it was hanging on the wall and it was crooked or needed dusting. There's there's a couple of versions of that story. But anyway, he got up on a chair to either straighten it or dust it or both, and
Right.
they shot him in the back of the head. That was it. That's
That was
the
the story.
historical story. That's the end of it. But
In
if you've
1882.
if you've ever been in that house in St. Joseph, Missouri, the ceiling in that room is so low, you'd have to be 5 foot tall or shorter to have
Right.
to get up on need to get on a chair to dust a
Right.
picture. It's a very low ceiling. So
Right.
there's stuff like that. There was supposedly an exit wound in the head. I mean, we can get into the forensics of it. We talked about the tooth and the hair,
Yes.
but there was a lady, I can't remember her first name, last name's Babcock. She's with the New Mexico State Police, or was, and she's a firearms expert. They asked her to reenact the alleged killing of Jesse James, and the gun was a 44 revolver, and it was basically point blank range with a 44 revolver shot in the back of the head. Jesse would have had no face left.
I was going to say there would not be much left at all.
Exactly. It would have blown his face off. Yet there's no exit wound in the body.
Right.
So there was not even a scar or bleeding or anything. He wouldn't have had a face. So there's a lot of different experts. Our photos match, firearms experts, DNA experts. Another thing with the DNA that they were dancing around, they claimed that there wasn't a living relative, and that they had done extensive research to found that there were no living relatives. So they had to exhume this grave. There was a living relative, and her name was Sue Laura Hale. She lived in California. She was a direct descendant from Jesse's mother, so she would have had the mitochondrial DNA.
Yes.
And they never contacted her. So Mom contacted her. She went, Sue Laura Hale went to her doctor. He extracted blood from her, got a DNA sample, and submitted it through a strict chain of custody to our DNA doctor in San Antonio. And when they tested it, our DNA doctor tested her DNA, Sue Laura Hale's, against our late mother, and said there's a definite relationship. But if you want to, he said, in a case like this, you have to cross all your T's and dot all your I's. Basically, and cutting it down to what he was getting at, he told us we need to exhume everyone from Mom's dad to his mom and Jesse. So we need to every generation between Mom and Jesse. We need to get it. We need to get we don't have to dig up. And I'm starting. I feel like I'm rambling. We don't have to dig up the grave. All you do is bore a small hole into a grave, and you can retrieve a dime-sized piece of bone.
Right.
And that's all that's needed. But anyway, when Mom pointed out all that, everything, and there's a lot more to it, but everything she pointed out, she wrote in her second book. and that's when the death she got a lot of death threats from people who were connected to the group in Missouri, and
Wow.
the FBI got involved. They
Must be
threatened,
like families sticking together trying to get the truth, right?
yeah, they threatened Mom, they threatened Teresa and me, but
Wow.
it was mostly aimed at our late mother. But anyway, the FBI got involved and put a stop to it, and it kind of went over from there. So we just
Holy
kept on.
cow. It's, that leaves me like, I'm speechless with that.
It's
I mean, here you are just trying to dig up the truth about your ancestry, and it's turned into a bit of a crapshoot, you know?
yeah,
Like,
Oh yeah,
well,
my mom went into it thinking, people would be happy when
yes,
she,
yeah,
that
yeah,
he didn't die.
and
Way
we still,
so
and it still
terribly
seems so weird.
nice.
It's like you've got an old West outlaw. He was an important part of history in that part of
yes,
history. But
yeah,
why would somebody go to those links to try to shut somebody up from searching for a truth? And we know they made at the
yeah,
time they were bringing in about 7 million a year at the museum in Missouri, and
right.
we didn't want the museum. We weren't even trying. I don't know if they felt threatened on for that, or if it had to deal with ego. I really don't
Right.
know, but it was really interesting at how far people go for an old West outlaw.
Well, I would, I mean, my theory would be, I'm a big believer. Okay, let me get my tin hat on. This might get a bit weird. So I'm a big believer in when, something comes up that you're trying to either bury or put out there, there's something else that you're trying to hide. So there's a lot
Yeah,
of mysteries surrounding, his life. And like when you mentioned, oh, we had like a treasure map. Where the heck did that come from? And
yeah,
is
yeah.
that something somebody wanted to get a hold of? Or, like, I think it gets a little bit convoluted. Like, there's a trail of stuff in his life. I'm sure he's had many phenomenal adventures, so to speak. Some not so great, but some pretty interesting.
That's true.
Who would not
And
want a piece of that than an alleged family lineage?
that
I mean,
makes
you
sense.
guys can prove it, but this other family could not. So could that be part of it?
Well, that makes perfect sense. Oh, and also before I forget, the after the alleged killing, they had a coroner's inquest in St. Joseph in 1882. So the next day, they had this coroner's inquest, and they pulled the lady who was said to have been his wife. Her name was Z Mims. So they pull Z Mims into up on the stand. She gives her testimony, but they asked her, "How old was your husband?" She's allegedly been married to Jesse for years and had 2 children with him. Yet she didn't know how old he was, or if he was missing a finger or not. She didn't know. She didn't know anything about the guy who's supposed to be her husband. Yet she claimed that some jewelry was stolen from her house during all the commotion, and she could detail every last piece of jewelry she had. And I thought that was, there was a lot of odd things. And then they moved the body to the James Farmer Museum a few miles down the road at Kearney, Missouri, where the James Farm was. Um, they moved the body there to bury it, and Zer- Jesse's aunt asked Zerelda, who was Jesse's mother. Um, she said, "That's not the Jesse I knew. Who is this?" And
Aha.
Zerelda was overheard saying by reporters saying she hushed her and said, "That's my rabbit's foot." What mom would refer to her recently killed son as her lucky charm, basically a
Right.
rabbit's foot? So,
Wow.
and then there,
Yeah.
and it just keeps going. But and
Right.
then there was legends of one of the pallbearers. Nobody knew who the guy was. They called him the Tall Stranger. And Teresa, that was a huge find she made. She found a photo in the Phillips collection, which we have in our book. It was of Jesse at his own funeral, standing with his mother. Our great grandfather Jesse James standing next to his mother at his own funeral. And at first, for anybody who doesn't know anything about that, it seems crazy that you would, if you're an outlaw and you're wanted and you faked your death, why would you even be at your own funeral? That
Right.
doesn't, it just seems crazy. But the thing is, nobody knew what he looked like. The only
Right.
people who knew what he looked like were his gang members and his family. And
Right.
which is another reason the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who'd been that, at the time, they were on par with the Secret Service back in the day. They
Right.
didn't even know who they were chasing.
Right.
So,
Well, they also they did a big write up on the funeral that day, and they were all talking about the mysterious pallbearer that no one knew who it was, and
yeah.
that's when we kind of came to the conclusion that was probably Grandpa Courtney, aka Jesse James.
Yeah,
Wow.
and then when Teresa found the photograph, it matches our great great grandfather, whose photos have been verified by experts as being the same Jesse James. So it was just awesome that we actually have a photo of him attending his own funeral.
You have to love that, though. It's
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
brazen. It's pretty brazen.
Yes.
Very.
Very sure of himself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's just so. He was known as being very bold. So,
Right. Right.
they
Right.
said he had no fear, and that kind of proved it.
Right. Oh my gosh. So you guys are going through all of this oral history. I mean, kudos to your mother, really,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Oh,
keeping
yeah.
that completely alive. And you're growing up with this, because at first I thought, God, how would I feel if I found out my great great grandfather's Jesse James? Like, freaking on. So, but sort of how I felt when I found out it was related to William the Conqueror. It's like, yes, okay, well, at
That's
least we got a
cool.
little bit of warrior spirit in
Oh,
there. That's fantastic.
wow.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's really
I have
cool.
I have a long Templar line, lineage, so as you can
Cool.
see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that's for another show. People don't ask.
Yeah.
I want to sit in on that one.
Oh yes.
I want to. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, well, you know what? Yeah, very fortunate. But again, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, once you get started and things start snowballing, you're just like
Yes.
mind blown, and it's
Yeah.
hard to stop.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and another thing, one of the, aside from our opponents and the people who sent death threats to our late mother and all that, one of the big hurdles that she had that always irritated me and Teresa and her, when a woman, it was that thing, and of course it started, I think her first book came out in 99. Women seemed like they took a back seat to male historians, if that makes sense. I'm sure it does. I mean,
yeah,
just because she was a woman, people they had that attitude like, well, let me take a look at that little lady, you just to make sure you're right, that kind of attitude. And it was that always bugged me.
Right.
And that was another reason, that and a lot of other reasons why Teresa and I vowed to continue the research.
Right. I think it's great. Like, from the time you started your research, or I guess your mom started the research, to the time you wrote the book, how many years have you guys, did you have to delve into that?
Almost 30 years now.
Wow.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
my mom knew, always heard the stories her entire life growing up, and she always told us about it. And it was, right after we graduated, she decided to pursue it further.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's been since probably, like Danny said, 25, 30 years now. It's just,
right.
Yeah, it's
and it's
over
just
25.
ongoing. Yeah. And I
then
never
you get to that
bored
point,
with
it makes me feel old, so I quit counting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, aside from the fact that it put you through the ringer. Besides that, because you're the whole FBI thing, the threats,
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, they
you guys,
really did attack my mom. Yeah,
Well, even after she
they really
passed
did try to
away,
attack her.
she passed away in 2015. and she was buried 5 days later. Before she was even buried, some of the same people who were connected to the death threats were posting things on websites all over the internet, making fun of, like, drawing pictures on
Still
her
attacking her.
obituary pictures, things like that. So
Yeah, they were still
it got
attacking her even
real.
after she passed away. Terrible things.
That's just, to me,
So
like,
it was the more they attacked her, even after she passed away, the more me and Danny were like, we're just going to keep
Yeah.
going, keep doing it.
yeah.
Well, and it shows, in my opinion, that shows fear on their side.
I was
Like,
gonna say,
yeah.
yes.
So,
That's just like, to disrespect somebody, and because you can prove lineage, they cannot. Therefore, it takes away that credibility as a researcher myself, because I'm one of those, any good researcher is going to get in there, find the information, cross-reference it as many times as you possibly can until you can't find anything else. And if you have somebody else who can't do that, it's shut the F up and
yeah,
just
And
stick
I
it.
and I
you're right. Yeah.
Right?
and I think that's why they viewed her as a threat, because
Yeah.
She stuck
she
to the
just kept
facts.
finding, yeah.
Yeah.
And she found sources to back up those facts. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's
Exactly.
why she was viewed as such a threat.
So
And
I
she was a
think,
woman. They didn't like
well,
that.
that too, and she opened up the can of worms,
Yeah,
Yep.
right?
that's
She's
right.
the one that was
Oh,
responsible
yeah.
for paving the way for us sitting here tonight, these books all being published and all being,
Right.
so the public, now the world can see it, and it shows the truth. And you're going to have
Yeah.
some opposition because they can't prove their truth. And
That's
hey,
true.
I mean, if they're listening tonight and they'd like to come on with you guys and share their version of truth, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it if you guys aren't, but I think, you have to be able to back up what you say. You can't just turn into bullies thinking you're going to scare the other side off. It's not how it works, because the other side comes fighting with evidence,
That's right.
which brings me to it. So when you started your research, you started with photographs, I mean, for you, your mom did a lot of the legwork for you, right? You got the DNA, and in the end, how did you keep going with that? I mean, you used handwriting analysis, Teresa, to put towards
Yes.
that research as well.
Yeah. We
Did you
used
get
the
certified
handwriting
so you could do it?
analysis.
Yeah.
I actually did kinda. It kind of I
Too.
found it fascinating,
Right.
and I went with it.
Right. Good for
Because we
you.
did what kinda started that, we have his journal, and,
Oh,
when
wonderful.
we were transcribing the journal for her first book, I located as his signature in there, J. James. And it was
Right.
his diary as James L. Courtney when he supposedly, you know, moved on with his whole new identity. But
Right.
sure enough, we found his signature, J. James, in his
Yep.
journal.
And his
And
initial JWJ.
yeah. And so that kind of did help me spur on to get certified because
Right.
it was so
I gotta figure this
fascinating.
out. So,
Yeah,
With
and just his journal alone is interesting,
right.
because there's a lot of known gang member names in that journal
Right.
from
So
the
right
James
there,
gang.
he's telling you the
Yes,
story,
Yeah.
and he also was very paranoid in that journal. He lived out on an old farm in Blevins, Texas, when he did create this new identity.
Right.
And he would mention in his diary how people would come out and they would say their name, and then he would put, like, in parentheses, or so they say. Like, he was
Yeah.
so paranoid. Why would a
Hmm.
normal farmer just, be that paranoid? He didn't
Right.
trust anybody who came out there.
Right. Well, now, I mean, with DNA, which brings me to this question, has ancestry got y'all as officially the descendants? Because that would shut everybody up. Did you use like ancestry.com to get additional information, or did you have to, since you already knew that,
We
his
don't
great
use
grandpa?
according to, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but
Mhm.
according to our DNA doctor, or he we shouldn't use 23andMe or anything like that. He said, well, he does testing, not to, and he wasn't trying to bash that. It's
Yeah.
got its purpose, but he said, well, he does DNA testing for state and federal agencies and police, different cities, and he said, and this is his words, 23andMe has its place, but it has no place in the court. When it's
Right.
good enough to convict. And he gave me one example, and this is a horrible example, but he said there was a girl in Missouri who had been abused by her brother, her father, and her grandfather. They all lived in the same house.
Right.
She got pregnant by one of them, and this was a couple of years ago. I'm sure it's even more advanced now, but they identified exactly which one. He said, with that DNA being that close in a family, I mean, that wasn't the first time. That was like I guess a common practice in that family.
Right.
But he said, when their DNA is that close and you can pinpoint which one of those three was the father.
That's yeah.
He said that was just one example he used, but
they're not as thorough. Like, they don't do the extent of testing that
exactly.
It's like generic. Even when I got mine done, I never dealt with any of those. I went to an actual like national lab and got everything done.
We did too, and
that's what we did.
Yeah, and we do have the DNA connection.
So we put our we submit. Mom had hers tested against Jesse, or against Sue Laura Hales, who they both have the same mitochondrial DNA, but I don't know why I felt the urge to put my sample in the DNA bank, so it's forever there. But I don't know why. But anyway.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So as you start uncovering mysteries regarding Jesse James, and I'm sure Frank and the gang, what were the most interesting?
Oh, we've got one photo. Frank James, for example, he married a lady named Annie Ralston, and she was from a real back the way they worded it in the day was a well-bred family, a well-to-do family.
Right.
And they didn't like that she fell in love with an outlaw, but I guess most parents wouldn't like that. But so Frank and Annie eloped. They ran off and got married, and it was always a question as to, nobody really knew where they got married. And we had found a photograph. Finally, our late mother found it. There's a photograph, and we have it. Jesse, it was Frank and Annie at their wedding at Jesse's house in Blevins, Texas. Jesse's in it. Frank and Annie are in it. Belle Starr is in it, and Jesse's parents are there. And also people from the Blevins area who have been identified by their descendants, some of whom still live in Blevins. So that was you couldn't get a better photo than that for us anyway. Other people hated knowing about that. Right. But it's the truth. It just shows, and the fact that Belle Starr was there. I always thought she was a very cool character, and there's a lot more to her than, like, history thinks they call her the Bandit Queen, but nobody really knows what she did. She was like a facilitator in the underground. If you stole a herd of cattle and needed to find a buyer, she'd find the buyer. And politicians, she took care of problems for different judges and politicians, outlaws. If she was kind of like a little mob boss. So it was interesting.
Yeah, very cool that it was a woman.
Yeah, very strong woman.
Yeah,
and she and Cole Younger was one of the gang, the James Younger gang, but Cole and Belle Starr were said to have had an on again, off again love affair throughout the years, which it was always that interested me. But when Belle Starr was killed, she was in Oklahoma. She had cleaned up her life. She was riding her horse from town back to her house, and was some man shot her from the bushes in the back with a shotgun.
Oh, cowardly way.
Yeah, very cowardly.
Yes.
So,
right. Right.
but that
She
was
must
just,
have known too much.
yeah, she probably did.
You know, I'm going to
That
ask you.
could be.
I'll ask you a follow-up question because I know it was in here someplace about EVP. So I'm going to ask. You know, if we're going to get into paranormal. So of course, people know. You know, like I'll ask, like, did you consult mediums or anything like that to? Right, the dead do speak.
Yeah.
I can attest to that. So the dead
Oh,
do speak.
yes.
So
It's funny you mentioned that.
okay, good.
It's funny, yeah. Well, very funny, especially lately. She may be watching tonight. I think she's watching. I'm not sure. Heather Besser. She's probably. I think she's the best medium there is. I've
Right.
never seen anybody. She knows stuff, and I'm very skeptical on things like that.
She was. There we are, Heather.
Hi, Heather.
Good.
Hi, Heather.
Heather is awesome. And
She is.
We've spoken to Heather. I've always been real skeptical of this kind of stuff, and just kind of took it with a grain of salt. If you know, kind of like a horoscope. You know how a horoscope can they're so vague, it's gonna fit. But when it came to Heather, she got detailed, like pets' names, pets we've had who we never put online. We don't talk about them, and I've seen her do it to other people. She's awesome. It blew my mind. It's amazing.
So you thought
she mentions a lot of details that aren't widely out there. That's where it.
Yeah. And I guarantee, because anybody could research us and find stuff about us online and put things together. But she said stuff that I know for a fact haven't ever been put online.
Yeah.
If you have mediums on your show, she'd be a good one to have on your show.
Right.
I guarantee she would blow.
Absolutely. We're always open.
I wish she could pop on now.
Yeah. Well,
Heather,
I mean, if you're there, Heather, let me know, and I can. Yeah, I don't. You'd have to throw. You guys would have to send her a link since you have the contact info.
Oh yeah.
To bring her into the show. So basically, you figured, okay, she seems straight up. She's got this information that nobody else has, and she gave you some validations. I take it.
Yes.
Very nice.
Especially on the theory about who we believe was buried. What height.
Right.
Yeah. And here's another interesting thing. Talking about Heather, her spirit guide is at a place, and that was with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Right. Yeah.
At a place, Laura Bullion, Butch and Sundance. That's her spirit guide. She said. Well, I won't tell you her whole story. I'll let her tell you.
Yeah, right.
So, but it's amazing to me.
Right.
And she has really a lot of things. We have a lot of factual stuff we can back up, but then there are things like just speculation that we have, speculated on. But she's confirmed that for us, and that's just a real good feeling to have that confirmation on the things that we can't back up with.
Sometimes it's what kickstarts things. For me, it was my deceased grandfather would come through with all this stuff, and he'd leave things on my PVR. I'd be like, okay, who put this on the PVR? It's nothing I would even watch. I know it wasn't me, and everybody in the house I don't know what it is. So then, Grandpa comes through on a reading, like a month down the road. He goes, well, now she gets it. Well, thank you for that, But when I watched it, I'm like, oh. And then he's like, okay. And then they get the ball rolling, and he spearheaded all of that from the grave. And I went on and did all of the physical, scientific and DNA and all that stuff.
It's funny you mentioned that because we've never really discussed this, but when my mom did kind of really get really into it, there was this feeling that was so thick in the air that I could
Like an
even feel it.
electrical charge.
It was like an electrical charged atmosphere. And it was
Right.
to the point like where she was like, that's kind of what really did spearhead it. And we didn't ever mention that, but it
No,
was,
but she was
she
part of
heard,
it. She still wanted to
yeah,
be part of it,
it
right?
was
Yeah.
And push
almost
you
like this.
guys. And
Yeah, it was something in the air that just seemed like it was pushing her to do this. And
yes,
And like
so,
what you
yeah,
and what you had mentioned earlier, you know, we can get the DNA. We've got all the census records, birth certificates, death certificates, all of these records, his diary, photographs, all of that. And it tells a great story, but there's a lot of details that facts and, paper records, DNA, that it can't tell you the story. And there's always going to be, there's always going to be some mysteries surrounding anybody throughout history, and that's where the medium it seems to it fills in not just normal gaps, but some of them are mind-blowing. It's like, oh my god,
it
I've never
opens
even
up other doors. Like I have equipment that talks, like very expensive equipment that talks. I had designed. So I mean, and a spirit voice will come through, and it's that person.
Yeah.
And it's almost eerie at first. You're kind of like, oh, and when you're hearing it from them, and you're hearing the voice, and it's familiar, it's sort of like comforting in a way. So you take the information and for what it is, and it's almost like for me, my grandfather's like, I'm sitting there having a conversation with my grandfather, and when he's done, he goes, "Okay, well, call again soon." All right, whatever, grandpa. And then I you get all of the same stuff validated by different people, gifted people, so that, because I mean, I just to prove a point, I would read with 3-4 different people whom I felt were really amazing, and they all validated one another. So it's like, okay.
Oh, wow. See, that's really,
it helps. It did for me, because you have to remember, I got spearheaded by a dead guy. Your mom at least was alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I totally like, okay, so my dead grandfather's telling me all this stuff. I really need to get into something that's going to validate some of this for me, because I have a really logical brain, and it's really, really tough, because when you research, you want to see what's black and white. You want to touch it.
Yeah.
You want to be able to, you want it to pop you into like another place and say, okay,
well,
exactly.
Yeah, and you can't, and that exactly right. And that's where I think the spiritual side of it, combined with the science, the logic, the facts, make it adds to the story. It adds a huge part to the story and fills in the blanks that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to find.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. And I just want to make a comment. No, I don't find it eerie at all. I've been hearing dead people my whole life. It's just sometimes when you have, like, when my grandfather's been dead like 30 years, it takes you back a minute. It's just like,
it's an emotional. I think
very
it's
much
that
so.
Emotional connection.
Very much so.
It's like,
because because as a medium, like, I hear dead people, I see dead people, and I'm completely okay with that. But when it's someone so close to you, it's still like, because you realize, like, I really miss that person, and I haven't heard this person's voice in a really, really long time. So when they're trying to push you on your path, like, I have no doubt your mom is behind here going, maybe you find yourself going into a certain path or a certain direction, but you don't really know why. And it could very well be Jesse himself. It could be your mother. It could be other family members who are all there saying, we're right here.
Yeah.
Just ask. Right. Next thing you know, you find this article. It's like, where'd this come from? They're like, right.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's like when Teresa had mentioned earlier about that the electrical charge. It's like the air was charged. You could feel it.
It was thick electricity.
It would always show up. We're researching, we're doing everything we can do, you're making headway, and then you come to a brick wall, and you don't know what. We never gave up. We would just start looking at everything. and just hoping we'd find a piece that unlocked that door. And then around the time where you feel like you could give up, although we weren't going to, that's when that would happen. It's like there's an electrical charge, and one of the three of us, Mom or Teresa or myself, one of us would find a major, just a major find that would push the whole thing forward.
Right.
And I always wondered, was that help from the other side? Was it just, why that electrical charge? It was, I don't know. I think it was spiritual help. Actually.
I also feel like it was just.
I have a hard time admitting that, but I do think it. So.
Hey,
well, I think it was
journey, guys.
destiny pushing her. I think it was destiny pushing her. It was destined to come out, the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he was pushing her to tell the truth, because it is a story that needs to be told. I mean, at any point, you find the signatures, Jesse James. Did he at any point, to your knowledge, like just come out and say, "No, man, I'm Jesse James"? Like, come on. And people are like, yeah, of course you are. No, really, I am.
Yeah.
Because I was looking
his new life so well that people like, sure you are.
Yeah. Because I remember looking through the journal, and I was like, one night I was just combing through it, and I was like, why couldn't he just put some kind of hint somewhere in here? And then later that night, I took a break and I came back, and there it was. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
They did leave you a pretty big hint, I would say. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I mean,
it's crazy.
You would think that Frank somewhere along the line would have slipped up, because you're born, you're raised with your brother, you go through thick and thin, you just almost die together, you just go through all of this, and how all of a sudden you just say something, you're just calling him something entirely different. Like, there had to have been something there.
And Frank, there's not a whole lot on Frank, and that is another person. I would like to know more about Frank after he went on, to live his life. And it's always been focused more on Jesse.
Right.
And I want to know more about Frank. So I don't know.
Right. No,
maybe they'll hear that and they'll bring something to us, I hope.
Yeah. Well, hey, you never know. I mean, he took a back seat. You have that term, your brother's keeper, and Jesse was the prodigal son for whatever reason. Right. So
Frank was more serious and quiet, and Jesse was more, the bold risk taker. So
there's a funny story about that. First of all, Mom always said she felt sorry for Frank because it was Jesse and Frank, not just Jesse. Yet Jesse was the one everybody remembered. And we always wondered, was it because of his name? It wasn't just his name. He has a cool name.
Because of his alleged death. Everybody wants a hero.
Yeah.
And why do people get more famous when they die? This guy was murdered, cold blood.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's just like artists. Most artists, they're starving during their life, painting their art, and then after they're dead, suddenly it's worth millions. So
yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
People want to know, like here, I'll give you an example here. It's just a basic question. Did he have a favorite food or favorite meal? Like, people want to know who these people were personally. And stuff.
He did like honey.
And he also liked spicy sausage. Like hot, spicy sausage.
There you go. That's a nice combination with the honey.
Yeah. And another thing he liked. One of the things he liked.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
No, one of the things he liked that shocked me was he loved fine china, like teacups and saucers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I never would have dreamed. An old West outlaw who'd been shot up throughout his life and made, tough as nails, loved fine china. So
do it with style.
Yeah.
Right. Do it with style. Spirit medium Daniel says, I have 20 minutes from the real Wild West and Tombstone, home of the Birdcage Theater. Amazing place.
Oh yeah.
Amazing place. Absolutely. So, yeah, that's this craziness, all of it. But I love the personal aspect of it because it really makes him more real and more human,
Yeah.
because we all, the legends are legends.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
We look at them larger than life, and sometimes we forget that no, these people were real. They were
Mhm.
human beings that had lives, they had, families and likes and dislikes. Like, are you guys still discovering things about him, or have you pretty much got everything?
I don't think we'll ever stop. Well, like we've gone over a little bit on like on how he didn't die, as history said.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah.
some of our evidence that we've found over the years, things like that. But then there's a lot more to him.
Yeah,
Um,
well, let's go. We've
the,
technically have about 40 minutes.
okay, well,
So
the
go.
treasure the
Yeah.
treasure map, for example,
Yes.
that was passed down through the family. My late great aunt Judy, she was something else. She was a character, but she handed them. She had the map, and then she passed it on to my mom. She passed the map on to my mother, and we couldn't figure out what the map was showing. It was just geometric figures, and it had code written. The code was fairly easy to break eventually, and
Mhm.
it told dollar amounts in gold, greenbacks, and silver. He called cash greenbacks.
Yeah.
Um, so it was gold, greenbacks, and silver that he buried, but there were no topographic marks or anything. And I
Right.
thought, oh my God, this is insane. I don't know how anybody could find that. Well, then
Right.
later on, of course, I kept that on the back burner, but just always wondering where do you start for something like that? And then, over the years and during research, we'd hear stories that Jesse and his gang were part of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And the Knights of the Golden Circle were a secret organization, kind of like a Masonic organization, only
Mhm.
they were pro-Confederate. And during the Civil War, they were basically like the spy branch of the Confederacy. And they would everything they did was meant to slow the movement of Union troops, burning
Mhm.
bridges, tearing up railroads, stuff like that. And then after the Civil War ended, they were said to have changed their mission from. Of course, the war was over, so they lost that. But they wanted to refund a second Civil War and gain money any way they could. Enough to refund a second Civil War. And
Right.
I thought, okay, maybe that sounds like two football teams who are rivals. One
Right.
loses, they always want a second shot, that kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
So going on with that, I started researching as much as I could about the Knights of the Golden Circle. And I'll say right up front, they lump people in like Albert Pike, Jesse James, and others. And there's
Right.
no proof that Jesse or Albert Pike were any part of that. There's no proof. I've never, or if there is, I have yet
Mhm.
to see any proof that they're a part of it.
Right.
But it's easy to lump people into a group when you don't have written records or any proof. You
Exactly.
can say anything.
But you got
I
a
mean, they
map.
could say Captain Kangaroo was in it, and
That's
who's
Yeah.
gonna prove them wrong?
Right.
So,
That was
but
true.
they had this. There was a treasure template that, according to the Knights of the Golden Circle lore, they allegedly got all the money they could any way they could, and not only once they got it, they would bury it. Like they'd rob a shipment on a train, they'd bury the gold, stuff like
Right.
that. And they didn't just bury it in any place; they buried it according to a template, a layout that they already had. And
Mhm.
I there was a guy who came out. He was a hoaxer. He claimed to be Jesse James. Um, Back in 1945, I think is when he came out. His name was J. Frank Dalton. He's been proven to be a hoaxer. He also claimed he was Kit Carson, claimed he was a U.S. senator, all kinds of stuff.
Oh
But the
boy.
guy wrote his handler wrote a book about him, and there were things in it that he obviously knew something about the treasures, and he knew something about Jesse and the gang. He wasn't a part of the gang, but he had more knowledge than a person should have.
Right.
And so we got to look in. I kept researching the template and kept that on the back burner because I didn't have a scale to it. And you can see it in my book, or you can even do a Google search for like Knights of the Golden Circle treasure template, or you can type in KGC treasure template, and you'll probably find it. It's a rhombus with 2 concentric circles and it looks like bird tracks and stars, stuff like that. Well, I had that, but I didn't know the scale. It's hard to find anything if you don't have a scale on a map. So put that on the back burner. Couple years later, Wagner Carr, he was the former attorney general for the state of Texas. He was also involved in the Kennedy assassination, the Warren Commission, stuff like that. He was real interested in Jesse James, so he would call my mom, and they would talk. And at first, he didn't like her. Well, he didn't like her because she wasn't backing his story, and he ended up being they ended up good friends before he died, and he wanted her to write a book about him. But long story short, he sent his driver out to show my mother and I where 3 large catches were recovered by, according to him, according to his driver, the people who recovered the treasures here in Texas. One's just right down the road from me, about 12 miles away. The Texas Rangers oversaw the recovery of the treasure. And I asked Wagner Carr, I said, well, where did the Texas Rangers take it? And he never would answer me. I didn't think he would, but I had to try. But he showed us 3 locations, and I thought, okay, now I know exactly where these locations were. I wonder if that template would somehow line up with that. So I got the template, turned it into a transparency, got onto Google Earth, laid the template over it, and played with it, and it matched up not only with those 3 sites, but it was right on Jesse's property in Blevins, Texas. So I thought, okay, it blew my mind. I thought, I finally have it. Now I've got a scale. Well, and then years later, it kept going from there. But the template, it turns into, there's 3 of them. They're all the same shape. There's a large, medium, and small. It's 3 of them. They turn it, everything about the scale, the dimensions, everything to do with that template ties in with Christian, Jewish, and occult Kabbalah. And it goes on and on back through that. Not only that, it ties in with the Kabbalistic tree of life. There's also a template in that shape that stretches from Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, Virginia, to Victoria Peak, New Mexico, where a large treasure back in the 50s, actually it was the 40s or 50s. I'll have to look at that again. When they recovered that treasure, it was allegedly $3 billion in gold. The one that was in Victoria Peak, New Mexico. Right.
And where did this all come from? Like, these are just heists?
That's what I'm, well, see, there was an old man named George Romey, World War II vet, 32nd degree Freemason. When he was a kid, Jesse was an old man. Jesse died in 1943 at the age of 97. George lied about his age when he was like 14 and joined the war. He went over to Egypt and that.
Wow.
But before he joined, before the war started, he was about 10 or 11, and Jesse hired George to help him and swore him to an oath. They moved 700 bars of gold and buried it. And George drew the map exactly where they buried it. He said everybody, when he got back from the war, the 3 boys who helped him were dead. They died in the war. He was the only one that survived of that group. And all the old men, Jesse and 3 of his old friends, were all dead, just of old age. And he said he swore an oath, so he never went. But he thought enough of our mom. He said, I think that would belong to you. You're in it for the truth. You're not making up stuff. You honor the past. And so he told us where it was. Well, it turns out that treasure, where he located it, at the time it wasn't, but now it is. It's on Fort Hood Military Reserve. There's no way I'm going on that. Yeah, that would be impossible.
No. Wow.
It was 700 bars of gold, each weighing 15 pounds each. that's more gold than Jesse and his gang stole during their entire criminal career in that one catch.
Yeah.
And he buried other catches around Oklahoma, Texas, different
Do you
places.
think he was burying them for this organization then?
Yeah, and it's not the Knights of the Golden Circle; it's Freemasonry. It's
Right.
tied in. It's tied in with a group within Freemasonry.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm a Freemason. I'm a Scottish Rite Freemason.
Very
But
nice.
and it was it was. Then that's why I became one. It was
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I became.
I understand.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Like understand the whole
Yeah.
movement of it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when I got into it, and I know this sounds corny, who wouldn't want to find a treasure? I would love to.
Yes,
Even
so.
now, I would love to find a treasure. But my reasons have changed completely. In order to figure out how the treasure templates worked, the scales, the dimensions, I had to study things I'd never dreamed I would look at. Prior to that, I thought Kabbalah was something Hollywood celebrities did with a red string around their wrist, and that's as much as I knew about it. Afterwards, I found out that's a topic in itself that's so deep you could spend several lifetimes and never really know all of it or even half of it. So
it's true. It's true. I know.
And I read about, well, Aleister Crowley. He's not considered a nice character by most people.
But he was so far ahead up here at the whole, magic schools and things like that go way.
Some of his writings I found answers to the questions I had. Jewish rabbis from the past and the present. Just studying everything I could. And Christian Kabbalah, that one's a mystery to me. There's a lot of writings from the past about Christian Kabbalah, but it kind of disappeared. I really don't know. I know Rosicrucians, some consider themselves Christian Kabbalists.
The Jesuits, I know.
Exactly. And then there's different groups. There's different groups like the Jesuits, according to some, are considered the bad guys, but then again, others consider the Masons the bad guys. So I always try to keep open-minded and not, but it's been.
I know.
There's definitely a lot of groups involved in this story.
Yeah.
A whole lot.
Right. It definitely seems to hop around a lot, just reading different things that you sent me, to give me an idea of discussions and so on. And it's just like, my gosh, it's really hard to pinpoint, because now like this could end up segueing into like the next segment. So like, do you get tempted, especially knowing that this treasure is there, and it is on military land, just to prove the point, like just to prove it's there?
I've thought about it, but I also some of the larger ones like that one's definitely a large one. I have a feeling they already got it. I have a feeling that's why the base is where it is, or one of the reasons anyway.
Because they would know. There are people that will be high up enough to know exactly.
Yeah, and
it's part of the whole organization.
Right? Exactly. And people in that group are more they've got a long reach. And,
they sure
and
do.
Not just that group.
You don't want them knowing that you know.
Well, I've wrote about it, so now they all know.
Well, shit, honestly. Way to go, Dan.
But and the corny part that I was getting at earlier was just that. I thought, hell, I'd love to find some gold. And then you start finding out everything that went into it. And it ties back. It's almost like doing your genealogy, only of an organization and people connected to one another. I ended up tracing it, Jesse, there's Albert Pike, goes back through different Freemasons in the U.S. to some of the founding fathers. It goes beyond them to Sir Francis Bacon, who was considered the founding father of modern day Freemasonry, Rosicrucian, the Royal Society, a lot of different groups. So I thought, okay, he's the guy who started it. He wrote a book called The New Atlantis, which seems to be a blueprint for America if you look at it in that light. or what America was supposed to be. But I thought, okay, this is the guy who did it. And for about 3 days, I was satisfied, and I had nagging questions that ended up going down a whole new journey from Francis Bacon to his mentor, John Dee, who was involved with, the Enochian magic, Enochian,
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah.
From John Dee through other alchemists and learned people to Jewish rabbis, most famous in their own religion, but then it went back to I traced the rabbis through a line from Spain, Portugal, different parts of Europe, the UK,
Not
back to
surprised.
a rabbi known as Rashi, who was the favored court guest of Hugh the Count of Champagne, one of the founders of the Templar.
I know.
And I thought, oh my God, it will went. I had no doubt on this. So I wrote the book and I submitted it, and I thought, oh my God, now there's no turning back. People are going to think I'm crazy as hell. And and I didn't know the publisher had sent a copy of the book to the current Knights Templar Grand Master, Timothy Hogan.
Ouch.
He wrote a glowing endorsement of my book. And in his endorsement says that I cracked part of the code dealing with the Templar treasures from the temple in Jerusalem,
which will be the next segment in November, guys.
I look forward to it.
I know. I'm sure people are just like, what? So yeah, that definitely will be interesting. But that's what I'm saying. Where your research has led has just taken you down a rabbit hole that I'm sure you did not expect, because when people think Jesse James and Frank James, they sure in hell don't think Masons and
Templar
societies
and Templar treasure and
people just don't think that.
No,
especially on this side of the world, like you don't.
My mom really didn't know when she was doing this just what she was opening up. She just thought people would be happy that Jesse faked his death and lived to be old.
Okay, so with that being said, you think that's why you're getting so much resistance on everything?
It could be, and actually, what
plays into it?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's interesting. One of the funny things, I remember when I first joined the Masons, I thought, okay, finally, now I can talk to people who know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
Most of the guys in the Blue Lodge don't know anything about that. I mean, they're good guys. I'm not trying to talk bad about them, but they don't know anything. A lot of them don't know much about the Templar and that topic.
Right.
If that makes sense. When you get higher up, you start learning more, but in a different light completely.
Right. So. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not something that anybody, especially back then, like they really were secret societies. And now they seem to be more open about it. Like I have a collection of what they would call odd fellows, which were well, I actually bought out an Odd Fellows Lodge, and I have other pieces. Oh yeah, because I mean, all these poor guys are like 90 years old, and their furniture is like 500 freaking pounds, and so they're just like, can you just clear it all out? I'm like, yeah, of course I can, because I love thrones and stuff, right?
That's pretty cool.
Oh, I do. And these things are like one of a kind because they were done by the prisoners of a prison in their city, or town at the time. Yeah, as a rehabilitation program. And the prison's also closed now. So I've got these original pieces of hand-carved masterpieces. Like the Grand Master's throne has to be like, 8 feet tall.
Wow.
I know. It's just
really cool.
I'll send you pictures.
I'd like to see it.
Oh yeah, unbelievable. So I understand, and they tell you things like, okay, well, here's some of the rituals, and they give me these booklets, and I'm just like, holy crap!
Oh wow!
I know. I'm like, they're real. They're like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Wow.
Because they're just, I'm sure it's not like the real hardcore stuff. That stuff never sees the light of day. But
you never know.
I'm getting props, and I'm getting I have like ceremonial swords.
Oh, wow.
And Grandmaster swords. And I'm just sitting here thinking, they're just loading up the truck. So
that's really cool.
It is
That
very
is.
cool. I was very honored to have it, to be
Yeah,
entrusted with
I
it.
think art. If unless I'm mistaken, like in cemeteries, I love looking at the old sides of cemeteries,
Yes.
and you'll see their initials. That it's IOOF, International
Yes.
Order of Oddfellows. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And
And then
you have that up there and the different symbolisms
and
and
there's so many other groups. There's like the Knights of Pythias, and then
oh,
there was groups like the Order of International Order of Improved Red Men. Oh, there's a lot of stuff.
there's
And-
all kinds
yeah,
that all kind of stem back to the Masons.
yeah,
So I find it super fascinating. I really do.
Oh yeah.
And according, to my friend Dolly, who was just in here a little while ago, the Scottish Rites Masons are the only ones who derive right from the Knights Templar.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. That's
Right?
what I've heard.
Yes.
But
Yeah, I
Right.
actually read that today. I was doing some more research.
there's also the York Rite. It's
Yeah.
interesting because on the when you after you're a third degree, a master mason, you become a master mason. That's the third degree, and
Yeah.
then you can either go Scottish Rite or York Rite. You can do both. I know a lot of guys who are both, but I haven't gone York Rite. I went Scottish Rite, and if you get without getting
There's-
into any details, I'm having to watch
Yeah.
myself on some things, but
Of course.
um, like on the York Rite, the top of that one is Templar. You're a Knight
Yeah.
Templar,
That's right.
but it's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting. For sure it is.
But I love the Scottish Rite, and I can say this. I mean, I can say anything that's in print. If it's
Right.
in print, I'm allowed to say it. So,
Right.
and there's a lot in print. You can find just about everything online.
Right.
But the esoteric side of it, the Scottish Rite is more esoteric,
Right.
and in Louisiana, they're more esoteric than most of the other states.
Well, the keepers of knowledge.
Yeah, Louisiana's Scottish Rite can perform certain rituals that the other states can't,
Right.
and I thought that was interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
It is. There's so much in there, and I find it interesting that you sort of picked up the torch and that you have your great grandfather who somehow was in the middle of all of this. And I also have another friend who they found proof of a settlement in Wisconsin of Knights Templars that came in a really long time ago.
Wow.
So
tied in
they
with
worked their way through. Now this site hasn't even been like totally researched yet, but they have found things there that have
Oh.
symbols that have only been seen in the Holy City.
Oh my God.
I'd love
I
to
would
know.
love to see that.
I would just like to know where, because
I can hook you up.
okay,
I will hook
I
you
would
That
up
would
love
be wonderful.
because they would have come in and they would have worked their way. They would have worked their way down.
Oh wow.
And from probably from Scotland, a lot of connections to the Native American Indians.
yeah.
Lots of them. And this is on a reservation.
Oh my
That's
God, that's
interesting.
really cool.
I think he's the Grand Archivist. I know another Freemason who's an author, not William McCann. It's a different guy. Dang, William Mann. I'll have to get. Anyway, he's an author. He's also a Templar or a York Rite and Scottish Rite, and I think he's the Grand Archivist for Canada of the Scottish Rite, I believe. Anyway, he's a member of a tribe as well, and he talks about the Templar and the natives. They got along great.
Oh yes, there's stuff surfacing everywhere,
and that would
and
tie
this
in.
location's loaded.
I often wondered. Quanah Parker, he was a famous Comanche chief.
Right.
We talked to his grandson. My late mother talked to two of his grandsons, and their wife. They were both married to the same woman. She was married to one, and he died, and then she married his brother. And he was also a chief of the Comanche. They were descendants of Quanah Parker, the last great Comanche chief. Jesse buried some gold on Comanche land in Oklahoma, and it was allegedly 2 million in gold back then. So that,
Wow.
I don't know how much that'd be worth a lot more today.
That would be
But
worth a lot more.
the thing about, without getting into it belongs,
Yes, of
it
course.
sounds corny because I sound like those old guys who are like, it belongs in a museum.
I
But
know.
but it's the relationship with the Native Americans and the Templar and
Right.
people like Albert Pike. He had a great relationship with a lot of different tribes, Cherokee and others.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
Very good. He would represent, I think it was a Cherokee tribe or Choctaw. I think it was Cherokee. Albert Pike represented them in a legal case against the U.S. government, and because of Albert Pike, the government paid the natives a large sum of gold.
I love that.
That to me
I
is
love
really
it.
cool. So
I think a lot of stuff was hidden on native land.
I do too. I mean,
How far north did Jesse go?
he
I'll
went
tell you if you're warm.
well. Well, Northfield, Minnesota is I think the northernmost robbery he'd made, or
Right.
documented robbery. But there are people that say he was up in Wyoming, Canada. Albert Pike was in Canada shortly after the Civil War, just because he didn't want to, people were after him. After
Right.
Abe Lincoln was assassinated, Albert Pike went on the run, and
Right.
then he was pardoned later and came back. But
Right.
and it's not just Jesse. That's another thing. Here's another cool thing in the diary we have, Jesse's diary. He mentions a trip he and the guys went on, and it was him and known gang members. It was basically without saying it was like, tell us you robbed it without saying it. If you look at where he was, lines up with old news articles of robberies that happened. Same time, same area, everything. They went to Shreveport, caught a riverboat, went down to Natchitoches. Yeah, Natchitoches. I think they call it Natchitoches. Yeah. Well, there's Natchitoches on the Texas side, Natchitoches on the Louisiana side. But anyway, he rode back. He and the gang went north. They stayed the night at a man's house. It was named Gervais Fontenot. And I thought, who's this guy? Anybody he mentions, we would research everything we could on these people. So I'm researching Gervais Fontenot. He was a retired U.S. Marshal. I thought right off the bat, that's odd. Why would Jesse have anything to do with the Texas Marshal or U.S.
Right.
Marshal? But Jesse's father-in-law, his wife was Mary Ellen. Her dad was a Texas Ranger.
Captain.
Captain Thomas Hudson Barron. Captain Barron, what a lot of people don't realize is Texas Rangers back in those days, one day they're rustling cattle, the next day they're a Texas Ranger. It was just wherever they got money.
Who's left standing? You're now a ranger.
Exactly. So, and I wondered if it was the case with Gervais Fontenot, the former U.S. Marshal. But the cool thing about Gervais, I found his family's genealogy. And Gervais, according to their genealogy, is a nephew of Jean Lafitte, the famous pirate.
Wow.
And it just ties in. I thought, okay, pirates, outlaws, this is getting weird. But it's Freemasonry tied a lot of those people together.
Yes.
And it was almost like a network, just like the Templar used to do. I mean, Templar, after they were banned by the church, a lot of those guys were said to have become pirates. So, I mean, it's not really that far.
There was a branch of them that did, yeah.
But like you had mentioned earlier, when we first started this, it's like, we thought, okay, he's an Old West outlaw, end of story. We didn't, in our wildest dreams, I couldn't have come up with this kind of stuff. Templar treasures, pirates. And I think what happens is when you learn in school or in just human nature is to categorize everything. It's like, okay, he's an Old West outlaw. He belongs in the Old West in a little town, and they shoot guns, and that's that. And then, these other characters do their thing. There is no gray area, but there were. And I think it bothers a lot of people when they've got their mind, mentally, they've got everything categorized and stacked up real nice and neat. Then something jumps out of that box, and it throws the whole thing out of order. And I think it causes a lot of people to have different types of reactions, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it absolutely does. It goes against the grain.
Yeah, it does.
You
It
know?
does.
Yeah,
But
it goes
and
against the grain.
that goes back to that old saying, "The truth is stranger than fiction." It
Right.
truly is.
Right. I agree. I agree. I mean, you guys are definitely proving all of that. And I think like I am just mind blown because I grew up thinking it Jesse James, Frank James, and when I have to take my pick of outlaws, it was always Jesse James. So I was looking to myself, yeah, this is gonna be great. And now, because I believe in synchronicities and I don't believe in coincidences, and I come from like a Templar bloodline. So for
Oh, I do
me,
too. Yep, I do
right?
too.
And I think that when things tie in together, I'm sitting here kind of thinking, this is actually pretty amazing.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
it's really
So I know. So, guys, we're coming up to the top of the hour. So I want you to hang in
okay.
when I sign us off, and I'm going to fill you in on a couple of things. But tell everybody how to get a hold of you, where to buy the books. I'm going to pop the book right back up here and do this one. This is one we've been talking about. Let me get rid of the banner so we can see Teresa's name as
Yeah.
well. There we go. All right, shoot.
All right. Yeah. Our book, Teresa. I'm sorry. Now I'm getting tongue tied. Our books, you can find them at anywhere books are sold: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Simon and Schuster, our publisher, innertraditions.com. There, and if you want to learn more about us, you can go to our late mother's website, which is jessewjames.com. jessewjames.com.
Oh,
And
okay. See, I didn't have that one.
his middle name was Woodson. My site is under construction right now. I
Okay.
don't know what I did, but I messed it up. So,
Uh-oh.
but but mom's site's still going, and she's got a ton of information on there.
Right.
And yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think of anything I may have missed. Do you know of anything, Teresa?
No, just we're on Facebook.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Facebook,
think
Twitter,
I think
All of
you're
your
Instagram.
on
links will be in
Instagram.
here. Yeah,
Oh,
I'll make
yes.
sure all of your links are in here. So maybe just fire me off the Jesse James one, and I'll put it in there as well.
Okay.
So when people come on, they'll be able to find it. Just click on it and go to the books. All the links that you sent me are actually
Okay.
in the broadcast.
Oh, great. Good.
Yeah,
Thanks.
try to make things a little bit easier. So so now I just have to go through some technical stuff. Bear with me. So guys, we have come to the end of another fantastic segment. Let's not forget this guy right here. There we go. The Halifax Paranormal Symposium, which is, of course, Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Eastern Canada. And there's going to be some great guests. You know, Amelia and I, of course, the Outer Realm, are sponsors of the symposium. So that's an even like cooler thing to
Yeah.
remember. So I wish I could actually get there, but unfortunately, it's just my schedule. Like, good luck. I just can't seem to catch up with anything. But here are the guests for this one-day event, which is Kim Moser, Lauren Coleman, Richard Gallagher, Daryl Walsh, Chris Stiles. Daryl Walsh and Elliot Van Dusen will be on tomorrow evening, so you guys will have to come and check them out. So their podcast is called The Dueling Parapsychologist. They're a hoot. They're a lot of fun, really knowledgeable. Chris Stiles has been on. A lot of people will remember Chris from the Shag Harbor investigation, which was really huge with the Canadian and U.S. Navy when this happened back in the back in the 70s, I think it was. So really, he's going to talk about a lot of things. So definitely prep up and get ready for that. And in the meantime, again, big thank you, because I didn't do the sponsor ID or anything right smack in the middle of the show like I was supposed to, because I was just like,
Sorry
so
about
my bad on that. So anyway, big thank you to Folgers Coffee for sponsoring us tonight and every night. We appreciate you so very much. Thank you. Big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon, who is an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all of your favorite music streaming platforms. He is the voice in the music that you hear on the intro every single show. Big thank you to him. Big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind our banners and logos. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Tomorrow night, as mentioned, we're going to have Dr. Elliot Van Dusen and Dr. Daryl Walsh. So tune in for that. It's going to be a hoot. Till then, guys, behave. We'll see you tomorrow night. Good night.
Good night.